Welcome back inside UPLIFT Property Management. I'm Marley Davis, the Director of Operations, and I'm going to talk to you about what happens when your tenant breaks their lease agreement. So the first thing that happens is you're going to need to review the lease agreement. Now, I know our lease really well, but of course, I don't know what's included in your lease agreement, and that's why it's important to review and make sure that you understand the contractual obligations that the tenant has should they want to break their lease agreement. You want to make sure that you're looking for things like early termination fees, required notice periods, subletting policies, and then of course any exceptions that you have included in there as well, so that you know how to respond to them giving you notice. Step 2, you need to make sure that you understand the legal justification for breaking a lease. The two that I want to talk about today is of course for military duty and then anything having to do with domestic violence situations. So if someone is giving you notice that they are breaking their lease agreement due to military orders, you are allowed to ask for documentation to ensure the correct notice period in order to break that lease. But should they provide all of that information, you are required to allow them out of that lease agreement. The other requirement is domestic violence situations. This falls under VAWA, or the Violence Against Women Act. And again, there are similar protections for people who are experiencing domestic violence when it comes to breaking a lease. So make sure that you review those should those be the type of situation that you're dealing with when a tenant is wanting to break their lease agreement. Now, a question I often hear is my tenant allowed to break their lease due to a maintenance issue? Now, of course, this is very nuanced and depending on case by case, but the short answer is no, they are not allowed to break their lease due to maintenance issues. But the long answer is that landlords do have a responsibility to maintain their rental properties, primarily to maintain habitability, health, and safety for their tenants. So can a tenant break their lease if a maintenance issue occurs? No. However, landlords do have a bit of a timeline that they are working under before there could be contractual obligations or financial consequences to not taking care of maintenance issues. Primarily the 30-day timeline, which is when a tenant gives you notice that there is a maintenance issue, you have 30 days to resolve that issue. And if you have not resolved it within 30 days, the tenants can then take care of that maintenance issue themselves, do the repair themselves, or hire out for the repair themselves and cover that cost, and then deduct the cost of resolving that maintenance issue from rent. Now, of course, 30 days is a really long time. If there is a habitability concern or a health and safety concern, I recommend you resolve that faster than 30 days. But I like to explain this 30-day rule so that when tenants go to a landlord and say, I'm not paying my rent because you haven't resolved this issue, yes and no. They can deduct the cost of those repairs from their rents that they would be sending you, but they can't completely withhold rent without any sort of consequence. Now, the next step that I like to recommend landlords do when they have a tenant breaking their lease agreement is to, of course, open a dialogue with that tenant. Find out a little bit more about what's going on, right? Ask questions about why are they leaving early? When exactly are they planning on moving out? And would they be willing to help find a replacement tenant? I know in our lease agreement, we have a stipulation that should they want to break their lease early, they are responsible for covering the cost of rent, continuing to pay their rent until a substitute tenant is found. A new lease agreement has been signed and we have a new tenant. If tenants have that consequence written into their lease agreement, they often want to help push that along and make it move faster so that they are not responsible for continuing to pay that rent longer than they would like to. So that's why having conversations with your tenant, once you review the lease and you understand the consequences that you can uphold, it's really important to find out a little bit more about the situation and to make sure that those tenants understand their contractual obligations. So step 4, of course, now after having these conversations, reviewed the lease, making sure you understand all the legal justifications, you get to decide how you want to handle this lease break, right? Are you going to be charging an early termination fee? Are you wanting to negotiate some sort of mutual agreement? Because maybe they are moving out because of a maintenance issue. So instead of them paying for the cost and deducting the rent, you want to come up with some sort of agreement that works for all parties involved. And then of course, if you can, make sure that it is really clear if you are still holding them accountable for any rent that is due through the end of that lease term. Even if they are moving out, even if they hand you keys and are returning possession early, make sure that they understand that they may be responsible for paying the remaining rent through the end of that lease term. And of course, we always recommend step 5, make sure that you're protecting yourself moving forward, primarily through documentation and through preparing your lease should this ever happen again, right? So make sure that you are consistently reviewing and updating your lease agreement so that you have all of these items outlined really clearly for tenants should they ever choose to break their lease. Make sure you add an early termination clause if you don't already have one in there. And then of course, screen tenants to minimize this risk. We do want to make sure that you always keep documentation of that application screening, of the leases that have been signed, of any email communication, notices that were given, even if it was over a phone call. Make sure you always follow that up with written documentation. It's only going to support your case should you have to take legal action, take this to small claims, whatever you may need to do. Just make sure that you are taking good documentation. And that's it for our recommendations today when it comes to tenants breaking your lease. Of course, we would welcome a phone call. We would be happy to talk about your specific situation and see if we can't provide some support. This is the company here at UPLIFT Property Management. We're here to support you and your landlord needs. Give us a call.